Morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here at Highways UK. I think particularly this year, given everyone's mentioned the PERDA rules, I was glad to still be able to get up here and speak this morning. Steve talked a little bit about some of the future opportunities that we see coming around the corner in terms of the way that our roads are used, managed, operated and built. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we're seeing that in Highways UK, particularly through our digital roads initiative. And Richard talked a bit about actually how Highways UK has evolved over the past few years, and actually it's a real pleasure to see when you look at the agenda how much there is actually about digital and new technology sort of on there. So I think it's really good to see, I think, how as an industry, I think everyone is sort of embracing and realizing the potential that digital and new technologies have to bring to our sector. To start with a bit of an overview, I think as many of you will know, at Highways England, we are only 2% of all England's roads, but we have a third of all traffic and 2/3 of all freight. And I think, as was mentioned earlier, that is due to increase quite significantly over the next few years. So we're predicting a 21% increase in traffic through to 2040. So really working out how we can use new technologies to improve the experience for our customer, to get those safe, reliable and smooth journeys that Anthony was talking about, and also how we can deliver better value for the taxpayer, particularly in terms of how we build, design, deliver enhancements to our roads and operate our roads, is really key. So that new technology for us is going to be vital to make sure that we're meeting those challenges that we face both now and in the future. And we did some work probably about 18 months to 2 years ago, looking at the long term of the road network. So a piece of work called Connecting the Country. And this talked about effectively the changes that we see over the longer term in the network. And lots of others have recognized this as well. So the National Infrastructure Commission has talked about a roads revolution over the next 20 years, and we absolutely see that. And we think, when we looked at it, we thought there were 3 big areas that are going to shift. So firstly, vehicles. So we know electrification is already kind of here. It is already ramping up and accelerating. But we're also seeing connectivity and autonomy, are 2 distinct but very interlinked sort of trends, also kind of coming around the corner. And ultimately, mobility as a service as well will have an impact. So all of that will potentially change how people use their vehicles. But there are also other really interesting trends, so particularly around infrastructure. So we see huge opportunities to transform the way that infrastructure is both designed, built, operated, whether it's through smart assets, new materials, construction innovation. There is some big opportunities in the infrastructure space. And then the demand space is really also, we need to recognize how our customer base is changing and how our roads and are operated is going to change and evolve over coming years. So I think, again, one of my previous speakers talked about the importance of regions. I think, we would absolutely recognize that the role of the city region and the importance of regions is growing. How do we sort of play into that? The changing nature of freight is going to be quite important, particularly in a sort of post-Brexit era. Is that going to change the flows and the demands, etc.? So all of those trends we think are coming together. And overall, there will be, we think a roads revolution over the long term. But the really important question for us that we wanted to reflect on in Highways England was, what do we do now? How do we get there? And our digital roads agenda is really trying to bring together the different aspects of this and talk about how do we harness the likes of connectivity, data, new technology to improve the way that the SRN is operated, built, and used as well. So Digital Roads is really our initiative to try and pull together a lot of different things that are going on across the company. Also a lot of different things we recognize are going on across the supply chain, other operators, etc. But it is our way that we're trying to pull together and drive this agenda forward. And we think there's a really big opportunity here, that the scale of the prize is pretty huge. So people have talked about a 51 billion opportunity of connected and autonomous vehicles by 2030. That is big, also a little bit further away. And we think actually there's some really significant opportunities a little bit closer as well. So if you look at things like the application of AI to infrastructure, again, I think the National Infrastructure Commission has said that could boost GDP by 10%. We're seeing, 5G connectivity and wider connectivity. That can actually kind of improve traffic flows and traffic delays by 10% or more. Data-driven decision-making improves productivity by 5 to 6%. So all of these, actually, we're seeing, they're things that are all sort of here now or here around the corner and really actually are big prizes that we should drive at. And one of the things we talk about as well is there's a lot of focus when talking about new technology in transport and roads of a real focus on autonomy and I would say the urban environment. And there's a real recognition that actually future technology, it absolutely could be transformational for cities, and autonomy will be transformational. But actually, one of the things we're trying to do through Digital Roads is get an increased focus on connectivity, not just autonomy, and the interurban as well as the urban. So I think connectivity has a huge potential for us, and particularly, as we've said, I'll talk a bit more about some of the trials that we've got that really demonstrate that through connectivity, you can improve how the road network is used and operated and improve journeys for customers. And in the interurban space, I think one of the things that I would argue is our roads and the SRN tends to be an easier environment for new technology to operate in. If you have new connected technologies, new autonomous technologies, it's going to be much easier to kind of be using them on the likes of the M1 than it is going to be on a city in the streets or on the streets in the City of London. It is just a more complex environment. So I think there's an interesting question around how this new technology will flow out and the impact on the interurban versus the urban network. So it's a big opportunity, and the way that we're focused on it is really thinking about it through 3 areas. So firstly, looking at our customer and really thinking about how do we harness new technologies to improve the way that we engage with and interact with our customers. Secondly, it's about operations, so really how do we use this new sort of forms of data, new ways of assessing, analyzing, interacting, automating activities in our operations. And then finally, the design and construction piece as well. So again, how do we move to much more digital-based design, autonomous, standardized construction? So really, they're the 3 core legs, but what we also have is we recognize there are some sort of cross-cutting underpinning enablers that are going to actually support that transition over time. One of those is connectivity, which we think is key. And there is a question about what our role is in terms of encouraging and supporting connectivity. The next one is the digital twin, so really making sure that we have a true digital twin of our network that can enable and support our activities throughout the life cycle. And finally, cybersecurity, so recognizing that actually in this digitally connected world, that security is going to be absolutely critical. So in just picking up each of those in a little bit more detail, on the digital customers side, for us, that is really about how do we make that shift from historically we have communicated with people outside of their windscreen in static modes via signs, often static signs, sometimes VMS signs, whereas actually when you can communicate with people in a personalized way to their dashboard, that enables us to do different things, enables us to connect with them in different ways. There's already 3 million connected vehicles on our roads today, and I think the question is how do we connect those vehicles to each other, to the infrastructure, and to us as a network operator as well. And as I say, some of the trials that we've been doing demonstrate the real benefits of this. So we have an A2M2 connected corridor trial, which has demonstrated real benefits. So actually we found that we can improve vehicle flows when you connect with less than 10% of vehicles. So you don't even need to have a fully connected suite to be able to interact with vehicles and actually manage traffic on the network better. And other studies have shown that, again, using that similar technology, you can actually increase flows of traffic and actually kind of journey times by potentially up to sort of 20 to 30%. So some significant opportunities that we see there that could be harnessed in the future. On the digital operations side, we see that there's going to be an exponential increase in data And it's coming from a wide variety of sources. So, no longer will it just be about us using CCTV cameras. You have the likes of Waze, etc. But also we're seeing things like, again, it's the connected vehicles. We're seeing, companies like Continental are rolling out smart tires that send out signals when kind of lorries are breaking down. They're the sorts of things that we should be able to harness. So I think there is just going to be this vast increase in data, and the question for us is, how do we harness that? How do we use the likes of AI to automate and optimize a lot of the way that we operate the network? And I think that data does also provide us some really interesting and new opportunities to integrate transport networks in ways that we wouldn't have done before. So for example, in Manchester, there's been a trial called our situational awareness trial, where we've been taking kind of floating mobile phone data from the local network and then using that to sort of optimize how we set the signs and signals on the strategic network to try and actually optimize the flows into the center of Manchester during rush hour and during the commuting time. So I think that's interesting ways that we can use data that we just were not able to do 5-10 years ago. And then on the digital construction, design and construction side, I think the question for us is really how do we get that digital, modular, off-site construction increasingly becoming the norm? I think there's lots of talk. I mean, we haven't set any percentages, but I've seen others talk about how does 25% plus of kind of construction become off-site over the next sort of 5 years or so. I think there is going to be an increasing shift to this over coming years. For us, this is absolutely underpinned by the digital twin of the network. You then have the sort of digital design tools that sort of take that and sort of support the design process. Digital rehearsals that actually enable us to make sure that actually when we get to that construction phase, we work through all those kinks and work through all those issues. Smart project controls that enable us to deliver things better and quicker on site. And that off-site modular construction as well that just enables us to come and slot things in the build process. So again, I think we see a huge focus on that digital design and construction over coming years. And what I would say is, we recognize that, we feel we're, building on a reasonably strong foundation here within Highways England, but also I would say within the broader industry. So across all of these areas, there have been projects, whether it's the A2N2 trial, I mentioned the sort of situational awareness trial, or, in the design and construction space, the rapid engineering model, which is our digital design tool for smart motorways. There are already some great examples, I think, of this technology out there and being used. I think the question for us in Highways England, and I would say for the industry overall, is really how do we actually kind of make that the default way and actually really catalyze that and drive that forward over the coming years. And as I said, just pulling on a few of these areas, one of the ways that we're doing that is, for example, in our major project space, one of the initiatives there is moving to a digital construction by default kind of perspective. So really thinking about actually what are all of the sort of different aspects of that digital construction process, and how does that become really the default mode for the vast majority of our big new projects. Similarly, I think connectivity is going to be an important sort of question for us. I think a lot of the enablers of some of the kind of benefits here are really through connected vehicles. When cars become that digitized asset and you can have that improved communication and two-way data flows, I think there's a lot of opportunity with the technology that we've already got, but actually 5G is going to enable a step change. So, we are already involved in some of the 5G pilots in the West Midlands, and I think there's going to be a question over the next 5 years as to actually how do we really scale up that kind of connectivity. We've been talking about potentially, do you have future mobility zones, and is that going to be sort of, potentially something that you would see on parts of the SRN as well. And we're building our sort of roadmap for digital roads and for the future. And I think, Richard mentioned, actually, is it Zenzik have built a similar roadmap for connected autonomous vehicles. One of the things that we're really keen to do in building our roadmap here is connect in with the likes of Zenzik, but also the broader industry, so that we all have a sort of fairly joined up view of how do we get to the future. So I would say this is definitely a sort of version 0.1, and really keen to engage with partners in the industry overall as we look to build that roadmap to the future. So for us, in terms of taking forward digital roads, the key for us is building that roadmap, building out those projects. I think we've got some good bases to build on. Some of you will be aware, for example, we had a £20 million sort of innovation fund call, I think about sort of 9 months ago, looking at actually kind of what are the, for people to come forward with projects that will help drive forward digital roads. We're taking those forward, and we want to, continue to take forward more projects that will help us drive this agenda. As I said, connectivity, I think, is going to be a big question in the next 5 years. We need to kind of plan and determine sort of what our role is in helping support that kind of vehicle connectivity. And then we do want to engage the industry and the public in this, because we do think there's a huge opportunity here. We do see a fairly bright future for the road network, and if you see a future with connected, electrified, autonomous vehicles, it will take a while to get to that end point, but actually I think it is going to be a pretty positive future, and it's important that people understand that and see that. So we want to think about how do we engage the industry and the public in that as well. I will stop there, but thank you very much, and I hope you have a good rest of Highways UK. Thank you.
Unfortunately, we lose Elliot now because you're another victim of Purdah. But thank you very much for giving us a little bit of an idea about where you want to take things in the future digitally.